Welcome to Daily Hope. I'm Joan Stevenson, Children's Ministry Director, and we are in 1 Samuel 26 today. You know, today's story reads like an action-adventure movie. I can almost imagine the cinematography of it. Saul has been hunting David down. Saul was anointed as king, rejected as king because of his disobedience to God. And then David was anointed as king very unexpectedly. But now Saul is enraged. And he is trying to kill David because he's jealous of him. And so Saul gets this tip off that David and his men are hiding in the desert of Ziph, and David hears about it. So he goes to check it out. But before that, I want to ask you a question. When have you been encouraged to make a decision to relieve your own suffering that in your gut you know doesn't honor God? Has there been a moment where you've been tempted or encouraged by someone to do something to kind of put yourself out of your own misery that in your gut you know doesn't honor God? Well, Saul and his army of 3,000 chosen men of Israel had made camp. They surrounded Saul. Saul was asleep in the center of it. And David goes to two of his guys and says, "Hey, which one of you wants to come with me?" And Abishai says yes. Let's pick it up in 1 Samuel 26, verses 7 and following. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground. With one thrust of my spear, I won't strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him. Either his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head, and let's go." So here's the situation where David is facing this temptation. His closest trusted soldier, Abishai, is encouraging him to take matters into his own hands and strike down Saul. And it would have been really simple. It would have ended his suffering. He could have become king. He wouldn't have been hiding out. But something holds David back. First of all, he fears God. He fears God more than he fears Saul. David trusts God. He wants to be guiltless before God more than he wants relief from his suffering. And that is the way of our life as followers of Christ. We come to a place where we lay down what we want, and we want what God wants more than we want what we want. We seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto us. It's an act of faith and trust in a God who loves us and wants what's best for us. And secondly, David trusted God to set everything right. He said, "Lord forbid I should touch the Lord's anointed." But he knew that God had many options available to him. He will either be struck down, he'll die on his own, he'll die in his battle, but it's not mine to make those choices. David knew that it was God's job to set everything right, not his own. And so he didn't take matters into his own hand. And thirdly, David knew that his reward would come from God. Later in this chapter, David goes a safe distance away and calls out to the army of God and says, "Hey, the army of Israel, hey, you were asleep on the job. You weren't protecting your master." And Saul recognized the voice of David and cried out to him. And David responded, "The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble." David knew that he could trust God, that God's reward for him would be so much greater than whatever he could come up with on his own. And that whatever temptation he faced to relieve his own suffering from Saul, he trusted God to reward his righteousness and faithfulness. So church, today, as you are facing different things and you feel the temptation to relieve your own suffering, do a gut check. Do you fear God? Do you trust him to set everything right? And do you trust him to reward you? Have a great day.